Coming at you from Los Angeles, California, this is Mike from Astro. Hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're interested in perhaps getting a consultation, I will be putting contact information down below. So when we're talking about synastry, we're talking about taking two people's charts, putting them right on top of each other, and using the interplay between the planets and the houses and the signs to gauge compatibility. And actually, compatibility would be an oversimplification of what synastry actually shows. Synastry shows chemistry. It shows how two people interact with each other. It shows how they feel about each other. It shows if there's sexual attraction or not, if the couple is going to be competitive towards each other. And it can be used actually in everything from romantic relationships to family relationships, business partnerships, so on and so forth. Synastry shows compatibility to an extent, but compatibility is kind of an abstract term. You really aren't going to be able to find any deal breaker aspects in synastry, but what I will be going over today is my top 5 worst synastry aspects to have in a relationship. It's not one of those situations where there's deal breakers. There's really no deal breakers in synastry. There's nothing in synastry that can't be overcome. There are deal breakers in composite charts, however, and I'll be going over that in the next video. But these 5 aspects that I'm going to be listing are the aspects that are going to bring forth the most amount of challenges. They are red flags. They're definitely possible to work through. Just the amount of understanding and the amount of fights and altercations between two people before they can actually get these aspects worked out is very high. 1, this was really bad. This is probably the worst. And it's not bad because it makes two people really work against each other and get arguments, but this particular aspect that I'm about to list is by far the most painful one that you'll deal with in a relationship. I'm talking about the North Node conjunct Chiron. Chiron, and there are lots known about Chiron, but at the same time, not a lot's known about Chiron. People will tell you all day about what Chiron represents. It's the wounded healer. It's a part of ourselves that we can't ever quite heal, but we can use to help others, supposedly. But nobody ever really describes how it works in synastry in a coherent way. And the North Node conjunct Chiron is a very rare placement. I don't see it all that much in synastry, but I have seen it a few times, and the story is always the same. I've also been unlucky enough to have that aspect myself. It's a very addictive energy between both people. It's definitely a very attractive aspect, but there is just a pain theme with the relationship, and it can the pain can be experienced by either person, the North Node person or the Chiron person. I've actually heard the North Node person being the recipient of a lot more of the pain, but in my particular instance, I was the Chiron person, and it was not nice. So the North Node person's subconsciously pushing towards that North Node, unless they have a bunch of planets on the South Node. And so think of it sort of like a train. The train's pushing forward, and if it's conjunct a planet like the sun or the moon or whatever, it's stimulating that energy in the other person, and then there's a very important interaction between those two planets. When the North Node is sitting on top of the Chiron person, it's not great. So the North Node person will open up a lot of wounds in the Chiron person. It's really difficult to describe and explain. A lot of times they're not really doing it on purpose. But the Chiron person gets to experience all those really deep, painful traumas from their childhood or just from their subconscious get really ripped out of them as a result of the relationship. And I'm not talking about plutonic pain, obsessive pain. I'm talking about the lying on your floor crying out to God type pain. I'm no joke, this aspect is very painful. The amount of depth that this aspect lends to a relationship is infinite. It's not always a really bad relationship. It's not one person's out to get the other person. It doesn't make either person bad. It's just when you have this aspect, the Chiron person's extremely sensitive, and they can actually either get hurt and have a really old wound triggered and then lash out really bad on the North Node person, or the North Node person can open up those wounds that the Chiron person has and just create this whole tidal wave of repressed feelings that most people just wouldn't rather not deal with. Now, it can actually be really beneficial in the long run, just like platonic relationships. You open up that wound a little bit more so that you can learn more about it and deal with it a little bit better, but still, the amount of pain implied by this particular contact is it's bad. Bad. Aspect 2, Mercury square Mercury. This one's a difficult one because it's actually when two people have their Mercury squared each other, and I'm talking about a relatively tight orb, these people are usually really interested in each other. They care about what the other person has to say. There's a lot of interesting dialogue between the two individuals at first. But what makes this aspect so bad is the habits and just like the style of communication. It's so bad that it's so different that over time these people just tend to really just get on each other's nerves. And it's as simple as that. It's just like a bunch of little things. Like let's say Mercury and Sagittarius versus Mercury and Pisces. Mercury and Pisces can be rather sensitive with how they deal with information and take in information. Mercury and Sagittarius is really blunt. Mercury and Sagittarius and Mercury and Pisces love each other because there's so much talk about, there's intellectualism, but it's much more higher minded. It's much less superficial. But then at the end of the day, eventually the Mercury and Pisces person starts to think, hey, this Mercury, this Sagittarius energy dude is kind of fucking abrasive. And the Mercury and Sagittarius person is going to be like, this Pisces energy dude over here is super sensitive. So it's just, it lends to a lot of, over time, a lot of annoyance. A bunch of annoyance. And it's just something that people get tired of over time. You do see it a lot in SYNASTRY charts for couples that stay together a really long time. You just can definitely bet that they had a lot of, almost wanting to like choke each other mid-conversation throughout their marriage that they had to really overcome. 3, Mars square Saturn. That's one of the worst ones. Well, I wouldn't say it's the worst. You see it a lot, but the thing about it is like Mars in somebody's personality wants to go and get stuff done and like go out and fuck and make money and go be their best person, and Saturn's more about like, well, before you do this you have to do this and make sure all your ducks are in a row. And Saturn and Mars don't really play nice with each other generally. So when you see them happening in a square, them coming into contact with each other in the form of a square, Mars person's generally wanting to, they're wanting to do things. They're wanting to go out there and exert themselves, make choices, change jobs, move into a different house, change their habits, go work out. And the Saturn person is like, no, what are you talking about? I don't want to change. I don't want to, no. Or if I'm going to change, I'm going to do it at my own pace, slower. And Mars is not really down for that. So a lot of issues there. It's just, and the timing can be off. The sexual desires aren't really, the Mars person feels very inhibited sexually by the Saturn person. So this can definitely land two people in marriage counseling over time if it's a romantic relationship. In a business partnership, I wouldn't advise it, just because there's just going to be a tug of war between, oh, we need to do this, oh, we need to do this. It's just, it doesn't bode well. There's a lot of understanding that has to really come about. The Mars person has to really need to understand that they have to do things more independently and not rely on the Saturn person's validation for their own actions, and the Saturn person needs to just let the Mars person do whatever the fuck they want and stop telling them that they need to slow down, do this or do that, and stop trying to parent them. That pretty much solves the issues related to that square. 4, Moon square Mars, or opposite Mars, or conjunct Mars. So Mars, Moon, hard aspects. What's really cool is a lot of these aspects that I'm talking about are actually very sexually attractive, and this is one of them. You see this aspect pop up a shitload, and it usually produces a lot of children. These people really, really like to get into each other. Mars represents the eternal masculine, and the Moon represents the womb, the eternal feminine, the part of ourself that is more receptive and sensitive and private. Well, Mars likes to pick and prod at the Moon, and they enjoy doing it. It's almost as if like the Mars person can smell the receptivity of the Moon. It's like, oh, well, this is prey, so I'm going to go after it. I want this. This is making me feel, like I'm capable of going out and getting what I want. So the fighting that comes about from these particular placements is pretty bad and pretty crazy. Usually what happens is the Mars person does some stuff, it takes off the Moon person, the Moon starts firing back, the Mars person thinks the Moon person is being way too sensitive, and then they fire back, and it just creates this whole big, giant, passionate, screamy drama that usually ends with angry sex. Well, maybe not always with angry sex, but still, it's pretty fucking passionate. You see a shitload. I actually know a lot of people that have Mars squaring my Moon and opposing my Moon and vice versa. And you just kind of got to learn to be a lot more sensitive. The best way to handle that aspect is whenever you feel yourself getting really fucking upset at the Mars person, if you're the Moon person, you're like, if another person said that, would I be as mad as I am now, or is it just because this particular person, with the way they said it, is it that what's really bothering me? Is it just this person? So, like I said, all these aspects you can work through, but this one's just a little bit. It gets you in your feelings really quick, and when you get in your feelings too quick, things blow out of proportion really fast, and you just gotta handle it. 5. Mars square Pluto. The most combative traditionally aspect in SYNASTRY, and it is not pretty. It's also highly sexually attractive. The Pluto person usually ends up pissing off the Mars person really well. Resentment builds up really fast. If y'all aren't banging each other, then y'all are probably going to just absolutely dislike each other to a T. In fact, this is why I have so many problems with the Pluto and Virgo generation, because of where my Mars sits in Sagittarius, and people from that generation, like my parents, no. Not dealing with it, not doing that. Don't. So it's just the Pluto person tends to act in subconscious ways that triggers the Mars person really, really easily. And there's generally sexual attraction going both ways. But the Pluto person tends to do passive aggressive things to trigger the Mars person. The Mars person reacts, and it's just explosive. That is one of the few SYNASTRY aspects that I would advise most people to stay away from. But I've seen it work in long-term relationships. I mean, one of my best friends got it in his SYNASTRY with his girlfriend. They've been together for 10 years. Now, granted, they fought a shitload. They have fought more than any couple I've ever seen, just in my personal day-to-day relating, but they managed to make it work, and it's through a lot of understanding. So I hope that was helpful. I will be posting more top 5 videos as well as more episodes to the AT Astro podcast shortly. Like I said at the beginning of the video, there is contact information down below if you have any questions or would like to schedule a consultation. So until next time, guys.